before I go any further with this, I want to add the solid hardwood pieces that kind of finish off the side panels on the top here. And mainly what they do is they buttress these bearing blocks, and that adds a little bit of support so they won't move. I'm working on the side with the pulley first. I want to get that bolted down nice and tight. And to do that, I've got a bunch of clamps here to set up straight edges on the inside for the bearing blocks to go against. I've got spring clamps in place here. I've also got this long clamp here that's pushing the wooden parts of the bearing block in tight around the bearing. And now I'm just going to take my wrench and I'm going to tighten the nuts on the top here until I'm happy that they're solid enough. All right, with the nuts tightened up enough that it's not going to move, I can take these clamps off and put those aside. I'll be using those again on the other bearing block on the other side in exactly the same way. With those clamps in place, I can tighten up those nuts again. And I'm not worried about it being absolutely 100% square to the sides here. If it's off, it's not off by very much, and certainly not enough for me to worry about it. Let's snug those up. And like I say, the main reason for doing this now is to get these pieces in place so that when I go and put these things back in again, they'll just slip right back down in without any fuss. It's actually a few days later, and what I did in the meantime was I built the leg sets for this. What I found was that it was getting too heavy for me to easily move around and work on. So I figured now was the best time to build that stand and get it out of the way. And I made a separate video about that, and there's a link to that in the description. So back to working on the bearing blocks here. I'm drilling countersinks, and then I'll drill a pilot hole through. And then before I drive the screw, I'll get some glue in there, and that'll lock it down tight to the frame underneath. And what these will do is they'll add a huge amount of support on either side of the wooden parts of the bearing blocks and lock those in place. Now, before I install them on the other side, I just want to double check here. Not that it's crucial, like I said before, that the cutter head be absolutely perpendicular to the sides of the frame, but it's good to have a look and see how close it is. And that looks pretty good, I think. I'm getting ready to start the outfeed table, and before I get started on that, I need to install one of the knives in the cutter head using the original tool. And I figure that's the easiest way to set the knives so that they're sticking out the proper length. And that way I can just line up the outfeed table with the knives to begin with. And then when I need to reset the knives in the future, I can set them according to the outfeed table. I spent a few minutes setting up this here, and what this tells me is how high the table has to be, including the steel top. So I'm just going to set that aside right now. And the next thing I need to do is measure the angle that the front of the outfeed supports need to be cut at, because what I need is to put a panel in there, and that's going to extend from very close to the cutter head up at the top down to the panel that I added on the bottom for the motor. And I'm going to measure that angle with my sliding T-bevel here, the wooden one I made several years ago. Now what I'll do is I'll transfer that to the miter saw and make those cuts on the ends of the support pieces, and then I can put one in place and mark it to the right length and cut it off square on the end. I also need to notch these for the motor opening on both sides. And I'm just going to put it in place and mark where the motor is, because it will not go all the way down where it needs to be for me to trace around the outside like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a preliminary notch so that it will go down deep enough. And that way I can mark it exactly how big it needs to be. Eventually this outfeed table will be fixed in place so it won't move. But that's after I get it adjusted, after I get the steel top on. But just to hold it in the approximate, and by approximate I mean very close to where it actually needs to be, I'm going to drill 1/4 inch holes through the side here, and I'll drive screws through the side as well to hold the supports in, and that 1/4 inch hole will give me space to adjust the table up and down. I did the same on the other side over here, and I've got the top that goes in here like this. Now I could just leave this square on the end, but it would probably be better if I angled it as well. So I'm going to do that on my table saw. I've got the blade set to 45 degrees. And then I can bring it back over and mark the actual length that it needs to be and trim that off as well. Let's back up a little bit here. What I want to do first, before I actually screw down the top, is correct this angle that they're cut on the front. I've decided to use 1/2 inch plywood for this because it's what I have. And this was just a guesstimate on the front here anyway. So this will get it precisely where it needs to be. So I've marked it, and now I'll bring it and cut it on the miter saw at that new angle. And this is the only thing I've ever used the laser that's on my miter saw for, is to line up these angles without actually measuring them. Kind of a rare event for me to tip this over on its side like this to make a 45-degree cut on this, but sometimes it's just the most convenient way to do it. Got it put in place and double check to make sure that the cutter head misses it, and it does. Not that it's a big deal because it's just wood. So I'm ready to fasten it now to the supports, and to do that I'm going to use some polyurethane construction adhesive. Then I'm going to fire in some brads just to hold it until I can get some screws put in there as well.